with over 20,000 members, over 100 chapters around the world. And it's individuals at the intersection of law and technology, whatever that may mean. I'm coming to you from the New York chapter, and then Jameson and Brian, if you just want to introduce yourselves.
All right, I'll go first. My name is Brian Wilson. I am the founder and one of the organizers of Kansas City's Legal Hackers chapter. And one of the things that I'm really excited about for an event like this is that through the internet, through these networks of people working to understand data better and figure out how to use data better, it doesn't really matter where you are, and you can kind of come up with new ways and new approaches to improve the local community that you're in, wherever that may be. And so that kind of network effect is very exciting to me. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Jameson.
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Jameson Dempsey. I am one of the founders of Washington, D.C. Legal Hackers. I'm currently based in San Francisco, but I also serve on the board of Legal Hackers as one of the global directors. So I'm really excited about this because while we're working through these challenges for OER for law in the New York City area or in the United States, there are challenges all over the world. And across our 200 chapters, I think that there's a huge craving for OER for law, for open access to educational resources about law school, about legal concepts. So this is just getting the ball rolling. This is one of our first workshops discussing this area, and we hope that it could be something that can be replicated all throughout the world. So thank you for collaborating. Thank you for working with us today.
Amazing. And, just to kind of put a cap on that, this is really about fostering an open culture for law, whether it's making data available, whether it's making educational resources available so people can better use legal information. It's a whole ecosystem, and we're really excited for OER is a really important and emergent part of that ecosystem, and one that's really important with the principles of Open Data Week. And just for those coming in, please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. Great to see that we have people coming from across different areas. So that's perfect. Next slide. Amazing. So you're here. What do we hope that you get out of this workshop? First, learn about OERs, generally, and OA and open access resources, so open educational and open access resources, and particularly in a legal context, and how this can help, not only lawyers, but really society and communities, spanning from, learning about the law to access to justice. So a lot of applications you'll learn about. And you'll hear about the different people, technologies, information, data that really help to, enable and also expand OER as it's available. We hope that you connect with a lot of Open Data Week attendees and get to just have great conversations with each other. That's a big goal. And we hope that you become champions of OER for law and understand that really everyone has a role to play in this, and it's really not just for lawyers. So then just a quick agenda. Jameson's going to set the scene for us. Brian's going to walk us through these amazing technologies and applications that are happening in the OER for law space. Then we're going to go through a prototyping workshop where you'll work in breakout groups to really understand how we can open more OER. We'll hear readouts, and then we'll do a wrap up.
All right. Thank you very much, Gabby. So I'm going to provide a little bit of background on OER, set the scene, and then pass it over to Brian to give some information about the toolkit, so things that you can use for OER for law. But let's start at the beginning. Gabby, if you can go, or Brian, go to the next slide. Thank you. So OER for law has a specific definition, and in essence, what it is educational resources that are offered in the public domain or through the use of a permissive license, for example, through Creative Commons. When we talk about permissive licenses, really what we're talking about is the 5 R's: reuse of the material, the ability to retain the material, so to keep it, the ability to revise the material or improve the material, the ability to remix different parts of OER, and the ability to redistribute, so the ability to share the material as well. Now, this is a little bit different from open access material. Open access material is really focused on making it freely available, less about the 5 R's, more about making it available for free online. So you might make a scholarly work available online. That's usually the course, usually what we see in the open access context, but it may still have restrictive copyright so that you can't share it or remix it. And there are certain values associated with that as well. Then there's another concept that we want to talk about, which is the massive open online course, or the MOOC. MOOCs may be offered on a permissive basis. You may be able to take those you may be able to take the resources from the MOOC and redistribute them and use them consistent with the 5 Rs, but you may not. They may be subject to copyright as well. However, MOOCs have been one of the most powerful ways to make open educational resources available, as you see through large platforms like Coursera or edX or Khan Academy, things like that. Let's go to the next slide. Here are some examples of OER for law. It could be anything related to the educational experience or the curricular experience. So course syllabuses, textbooks, lecture videos, lecture slides, handouts, course notes, things like problem sets, or even practice exams. I included an image here. This is CS 106B, which is one of the foundational computer science courses at Stanford. And the professors there have made all of the materials for the course available for free online. You could, in essence, audit CS 106B and other courses from Stanford online for free. It's on a very simple website. The PDFs and the PowerPoint presentations, problem sets are all available for you to use right now, and for anyone around the world to use right now. Let's go to the next slide, please. Let's talk about some of the benefits of OER. Now, by making open educational resources available for people to use and remix, improve, share, and hold on to, it can reduce the cost of education rather than purchasing books, rather than purchasing books, rather than having to go through the process of selling your used books. You can just retain the materials that you have available. They're easy to customize. You can update them rapidly over the course from year to year. This saves a lot of time. It saves a lot of publishing costs. It saves a lot of paper, honestly. It's available 24/7 anywhere in the world. It promotes access to knowledge, and it improves civic discourse. By making information freely available, more people have access to foundational materials about our society, about our world. Let's go to the next slide, please. OER has a relatively long history. There's been just over 20 years of what we call OER. It started with Dave Wiley. Dave Wiley is a professor of education. He coined the term open content. The concept there was, how might we take the concept of free and open source software and expand it to content as well, so creative works. This spurred MIT to launch open courseware. MIT decided in 2001 that it was going to make, to the best of its ability, all of its courses available online for free. And it has done so. You can take essentially all of MIT's courses online for free right now if you wanted to. And this isn't from any random institution. This is from one of the premier science and technology institutions, research institutions in the world. UNESCO has adopted OER as a fundamental platform for making information available, for improving access to education around the world. And this has been since 2002. And of course, we've seen the growth of the large MOOC platforms, Coursera, edX, and Udacity, just over the course of the last 8 to 9 years. Let's go on to the next slide. So where are we today with open educational resources? There are over 2,400 courses on MIT's OpenCourseWare site. There are over 3,000 courses on edX from universities like Harvard, UPenn, Oxford, and many, many more. There are 90.4 million registered users on the Khan Academy platform that's geared toward K-12 learning. And just over the course of the pandemic, for some more recent data, OpenStax, which is a place where you can access open educational resources, had a 200% year-over-year increase. So there's an increased interest in open educational resources through the pandemic, as more people are stuck at home, accessing content or accessing their courses on Zoom and looking for new ways to learn. Let's go to the next slide. Now, there's a little bit of an irony here, because OER for law has existed for just about the same amount of time. In 1999, Harvard Law School's Berkman Center launched H2O, which is a collaborative learning platform for OER in legal education. In 2012, CALI, the Center for Computer Assisted Learning, or the Computer Assisted Learning Institute. I think I screwed that up, but hopefully I got it right that last time. They began publishing free and open casebooks and supplements under their eLangdell platform. In 2017, a bunch of law professors and Cornell launched Law Archive, which is an open access publishing platform for legal research. And finally, just a few weeks ago, law professors from around the country came together through the first Defunding Casebook conference. And the question there was, how can we make casebooks more freely accessible to everyone? How might we collaborate so that foundational materials are available for everyone to access for free? Let's go to the next slide. And it's still a pressing issue, despite the fact that OER for Law has existed for well over 20 years now. The problems still exist within legal education and within the legal system more broadly. The cost of legal education is exorbitant. The average 3-year legal education for a student in the United States is $130,000, and that would be on top of a bachelor's degree. In addition, the average US law student pays over $1,000 per year just for casebooks, just for the books that they use that contain excerpts from publicly accessible, public domain cases. And the cost drives people away from law school. And not only that, it also changes incentives for people who enter law school. The costs of law school drive people away from perhaps more public-oriented legal service toward finding ways to pay back your loans. And so this has a real consequence for access to justice. Now, let's stay actually on that slide, Brian. Thank you very much. But let's look at some of the large platforms as well, because we've had over 10 years of access to platforms like edX and Coursera now. But if you look today, out of the over 3,000 courses on edX, fewer than 100 are in the law category. And only a slim minority of those courses are foundational and doctrinal courses. In fact, there's a real discovery challenge too, because if you search for law on many of these platforms, you may end up finding things related to the laws of physics, more likely to find things about STEM laws than you are to find laws and rules and the legal system. Now, this lack of access also makes it more difficult for the average person who's curious about the law to understand it, or for those who have a need to understand the law because of some pressing issue. And this dependence on lawyers for legal information creates a professional moat that I think has a deleterious effect on access to justice, with many risks, like making errors in personal or professional matters, distrust of the legal system because of lack of access, or even political manipulation because there's lack of understanding about core fundamental legal concepts within society. So there's a real pressing need for OER for law. We can go to the next slide, Brian. But there are also real barriers as well. Legal culture tends to be closed. For many lawyers, access to information, or for many law schools, access to information, access to resources is a value add. It's something that differentiates one lawyer from another. And so there's less of an incentive to make that information freely available, including through OER for law. There may be institutional or instructor resistance. They work really hard on their casebooks or on their syllabuses, and they don't want them to be freely available to be remixed. There's also a jurisdictional challenge. Now, in the United States, we have federal law, certainly, but there's lots of difference from state to state. And of course, these differences are exacerbated when you go from the United States to other systems. For example, common law countries to civil law countries. The casebook method is another challenge for OER for law. While we have casebooks, and casebooks are being released in free and open ways through things like H2O and eLangdell, the actual pedagogy, the way of teaching law, is done in a classroom through the Socratic method. And so the class lecture looks different from maybe a foundational biology lecture or something like that. So this raises challenges. How do you replicate that, or how do you improve upon that in the context of open educational resources for law? There may be privacy and security issues of students talking about hot button issues or edge cases, or following a line of reasoning within difficult cases and making those available online for free, for example, through lecture videos. And of course, there's a lack of awareness about OER for law. It's difficult to find best practices, it's difficult to find tools, and it's difficult to find data about the state of OER for law. That's one of the reasons why we're putting this workshop together and why we hope to start or continue really a conversation about OER for law. So we can go on to the next slide, Brian. But what if we had OER for law? What are some of the benefits we could see? Well, we could see radically decreased costs for traditional legal education. We could see the development of community legal resources. We could see improved civic participation, maybe next generation legal educational platforms, and maybe the dream for some, free law school or open law school that anyone can access at any point in time. Maybe the ABA could credential something like this. So you don't need to worry about spending your life savings or going deeply into debt in order to get a legal education. Let's go to the next slide, please. And of course, this isn't just for legal educators. It's for everyone. Lawyers, policy advocates, law professors, developers, designers, community activists, civic technologists, public librarians. I see there are librarians in the group, and librarians have a foundational, fundamental role to play in this. And of course, small businesses as well that can help promote access to OER for law. So you are part of this conversation. You can help. And so I'm really, really excited to continue this conversation. We can go to the next slide, Brian. And let's go into the toolkit. So thank you very much.
All right. So thank you, Jameson and Gabby, for setting all of this up, kind of building to this moment where now we get into the how of it. We heard a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish, why it's important, and now this is going to dive into a little bit more about how you can go about doing this. So we created a website. It's available at this link. It's legalhackers.github.io/OER virtual forum. And yes, thank you. You read my mind, Gabby. That link is now available in the chat. And the exciting thing about this website is we kind of centered it around 4 ideas. So one of the ideas is get involved. So there's a way to connect with us through a Google form so that you stay updated about the current state of OER. You can stay updated with the development of the site that we've created. And then you can also add to the inventory of OER tools, OER examples. And then you can use those examples and the examples from others to learn about how people in different places might be using OER in ways that you hadn't thought of before. Or you can develop a coalition from somebody who's doing something very similar to you. And then finally, it has a toolkit page that goes into some of the programs and softwares and a little bit about the methods that are used to create these resources. And I'm going to go out of hold on, I'm going to go back. So a few brief examples before I go to our site itself. Actually, let me go back to the site itself. I'm gonna mix it up here. So as I was describing, this is the homepage where down at the bottom there's this form for how to get involved. There's also the inventory. If you want to submit stuff, this is where you do it. Once you submit it, it is curated and uploaded into this kind of ontology of the different open educational resource tools or methods. And then finally, we have a toolkit. So it talks a little bit about the different things that might be used to accomplish some of these things. And it looks like I made a markdown error when I was editing some of this stuff, but I will fix that after the fact. The really exciting part about all of this, though, is that it's free, publicly available, and on GitHub. So anybody who has a GitHub account can go in, they can make a pull request and actually, contribute to this body of knowledge themselves, similar to the way that you might contribute to Wikipedia to update a common body of knowledge for everybody who's trying to use Wikipedia. And with that, I'm going to get back into the presentation and kind of walk through, how some of these examples could work. Another feature that I'll quickly plug for GitHub that I didn't get through when I was showing you there is that you can create a website for free. So that's one of the, I think, best features about GitHub. That website that you just saw was completely free. And all you have to do is basically create one page, and that one page subsequently can be just turned on to a live website. You don't have to administer any of the domain name registration or any of the different registries that are required in order to set up a website in a usual sort of way. It automates that process for you and makes it very easy. Some of the other examples that are free and that promote this kind of open access and that I make use of quite frequently is just the G Suite. So if you have a Gmail account, you can create docs and share them with a bunch of people. You can create spreadsheets, which can lead to dashboards. You can share those with people. You can collect information through forms. You can share information through slides, and you can set up meetings through Google Calendar. It's really amazing the amount of things that you can do for free now compared to a few years ago when a bunch of these different applications were more locked down and less available for solving these types of issues. Daca Symbol is another great example that I have seen a lot of development around in the legal tech space, in the open education resources space. It's a kind of like a programming language that runs on Python and YAML, which is a really basic markdown. And basically all you do is come up with decision tree logic that helps walk you through a guided interview, answering questions and finding out, what the appropriate resource might be for you, or automatically generating a request, or, creating an entry into a database. And the great thing about Daca Symbol is that they have a ton of functionality built into it. They even have the ability to fax people built into it. So maybe you're working with a really old municipal system and you need to fax some information. This would be a way that you could automate that process of sending faxes to people who need that information in order to do some function. Finally, I would be remiss not to talk about open data. Open data is really spectacular in the context of OER4 law, because you can now start to visualize some of the policy efficacy. Maybe, a policy isn't achieving one of its stated goals. You can actually use this data to measure that, find ways to do interventions that would help fix that, and move your community together in a positive way. And so some of the example projects that you could just spin up right now if you did maybe 2 or 3 things. One is a community legal wiki. So you could create a GitHub repository, you get insights from community groups and attorneys, and then you just spin up a website so that people can understand and have a guide for how to navigate some of the pressing legal issues that they're facing. In Kansas City, people are doing stuff like this a lot around tenant rights and evictions and things like that. Another example could be like a learning repository. I think this would be a great example for the context of law school, where there's a lot of good information that's captured in outlines from year to year. As a law student, that was one of the things that I sought the most, was the outlines from all of the people who were very smart year after year, because that body of knowledge, you can just keep building from it. You can keep adding to it. And then it becomes sort of the Rosetta Stone for things that you need to understand in order to do something. On top of that, it's very easy to embed YouTube videos into something like a GitHub Pages website. All you have to do is go into YouTube and copy an embed code, and you just place it in there. And suddenly you have a video, you have lecture notes, and you're off to the races. There's also the ability to spin up a resource directory. So, literally this is what I was using to do the resource list for our OER website, where you just submit information to Google Forms. There's a curated list of that information that I look at, that others of this OER group look at, and then we upload all of the responses to the GitHub Pages website. Jameson just linked to a really great site that has examples of how you can embed Daca Symbol plus some expert knowledge to automatically create apps that do things that individuals alone would have a hard time doing. So this helps automate some of the routine processes that people go through in the legal system in a way that increases transparency into, what types of issues are people actually having, and then working to develop solutions around how we can do better, how we can navigate this problem better. And finally, if we use some of this open data plus some graphing software, that makes it so you have a quick visualization app to see, what the impact of a proposed policy might be. And an example of that I'm going to switch over to really quick before we get to the workshop is from one of the research groups near me at MIT, where I do some research, which is it's called Cityscope. And basically what Cityscope does is they take a webcam that reads kind of like these symbols on the bottom of a set of Legos. They have these cities that are kind of built up of Legos as models of, the actual places that they're meant to represent. And then you have a projector that projects down based on an algorithm that works to define, what these different configurations mean, so that you can in real time evaluate, what a proposed policy might do to some sort of city service or some sort of city feature. And so the possibilities are really limitless. And this is one of the reasons why I want to encourage all of you to think very broadly and to be as creative as you possibly can when you're thinking about how to solve some of these issues. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Gabby to get us into the prototyping workshop.
Amazing. Thank you, Brian. That's going to be just such good inspiration for the conversations that I'm sure to follow. So next slide. Great. So this is where the rubber hits the road, and hopefully this is where we start to have some fun and get our feet wet with this. So with this workshop portion, we're really looking to empathize with people, which we'll call personas, that can manage the type of educational resources that we've been talking about, but maybe don't necessarily know how to open those resources or know what that means. And we know that, these resources, whether it's a casebook or a spreadsheet, might be really valuable to others. So we'll get into that a little bit. And then we'll understand what are the technologies like the ones Brian just went through, or what are the processes and priorities, as Jameson mentioned, that need to be kept in mind as we support these personas and opening resources. So we're going, very much from the high level of, how can OER change the law, but also on the ground, there are individuals who can really unlock resources and open up information and data and learning on a daily basis. And that's what we really want to highlight here, and that we all have a role in it. So we're going to have 4 kind of key steps in this workshop. We're going to first, we'll have in breakout groups, pick the persona. We'll understand kind of the barriers or problems facing that persona and opening a resource. Then we're going to talk about kind of how to break through those barriers and support those personas and what that might look like. And then we'll hear highlights from all the different breakout discussions. So really quickly, before we break you out, I'm just going to kind of go through the key steps here very quickly. So when you pick your persona, it's really about adding a little bit of color to it, but it doesn't totally need to be a real person. It just has to have enough of kind of the characteristics that you need to understand someone's situation and what their kind of day-to-day might look like. And then we'll also want to understand what resources does this persona manage. So the next slide to actually tell you what this means and that you'll discuss in your group. So we'll have a couple different scenarios for you here. We'll have an environmental law professor who just put out a book and, isn't really, is giving away the proceeds, but the book's really expensive. And we have a reporter who wants to understand what's going on with FOIA requests. So we'll have all these kind of different examples. We have an example covering kind of library contexts, student contexts, local government groups, and then there's also build your own option. If you're familiar with this space and you've encountered a situation where it's like, hey, I wish that was open, that's something you and your group can kind of bring together. So your group will pick one of these scenarios and then understand what's like an OER seeker, who would actually use this resource. And that's where the Open Data Week audience is so powerful, because it's community activists, civic technologists, academics, people who just do this in their free time. So everyone can benefit from this. Next slide. Then we'll talk about kind of barriers at a high level, and then we'll ask you to pick like 1 to 2 barriers and add a bit more color to, what does it look like? Why does this person not have the time, or maybe they haven't heard about this movement, and why is that? So you'll do that in your groups. Next. Then talk about, what are the partnerships, the different technologies we heard about, the different kind of moves you can make to help this persona and opening up the resource and getting into the OER seeker. Next slide. And then start to, this is where the magic happens. You're going to come together as a group and say, okay, what might a solution look like here that we could maybe even test out, if we found a student or a professor or a public official who is interested in this. And then we'll hear from the group. So next slide, just a few notes for the breakout logistics. I think it's great if everyone can have a role. So if you want 2 note takers, we'll look to do groups of 4, someone to keep time, and then a person to give the readout. Try to keep your comments so that everyone gets space to share. And we're also a big fan of kind of the yes and from improv. If someone puts something out there, build on it. And that's the fun part. And then we'll have this presentation here that I'm going to share in the chat, where the different breakouts can basically take a slide and they'll just, as you go through the different steps, you'll start to fill out the different sections of this slide. So go through the slides, and then by the end, you should have this filled out for the readouts. Now I'm going to put my hands like this and hope that the breakouts go according to plan. And make sure you also introduce yourselves and get to know the other people that are in your group and where you're all coming from. I'm going to do breakout. I'll do 3. Great. So thanks, everyone. Welcome back. It looks like both groups got to kind of solutioning and solving, which is really cool. And then it looks like one of the groups also started to think, about poking holes in that. So everyone had a lot of great ideas from what I heard, and now it's time to share. So maybe, Brian, if you could share screen, because you did it really well. That's when you win a pie eating contest, more pie.
That's my best skill is share screen.
So good. And let's hear from the groups and what your discussions were like. Maybe if someone wants to take the lead for the group and others can chime in, tell us your persona, tell us, the barriers, what did you understand, what did you learn, and then what's like a possible solution, and what are your open questions? Take it away, group 1.
I guess I can talk about what we were getting into. I guess we're all sort of coming into OER for law from different perspectives. I see it a lot in New York around housing, and Anshuman and Matthews see it kind of in terms of a lack of access for the universities in India. They're both based in India. So only a handful of law schools have all of the kind of materials and resources that people need, and the rest are kind of doing it ad hoc from other places. And so one of the ideas, basically the main idea we came up with around this was putting together a kind of wiki toolkit for setting up these kinds of courses and getting these kinds of resources at other institutions and in other, community organizations. We were focused sort of on housing law and stuff, but really kind of across the board for all of this, and how to, deploy it and then test it and get it in the hands of people who are actually going to use it and see that they are using it through different success metrics. I think probably, across the board, the biggest problem is just, since especially in the situation for Anshuman and Matthews, where it's a handful of institutions have kind of all of the resources right now, it's just getting, finding, making the connections with those people, those domain experts, and then, helping share those resources.
Amazing. Other comments or notes people want to add to this? Thank you so much, Joseph.
I don't know if anybody else wants to add, but I would invite other people to add. And then I'll plan to be the wrapper upper maybe.
So we are planning to offer curated content that is relevant to the community, to the seeker. So our seeker would be a local activist or a person like that who would need to know the legal standpoint or the legal provisions that relate to some uh, maybe housing related. That would be a barrier also, because the law professor who's our persona, he won't be able to know what would be the most relevant data that the seeker would want. And most of the data would be in the physical format. So how do we get that online, and how do we make that accessible? And locating the community experts, so that would also be a barrier for us, for the barriers that.
Yeah, and to kind of put a bow on some of this, I think this is, we're looking at this as a way to, start a dialogue and begin getting feedback, so that we can almost have these universities and these communities developing the toolkits that are most impactful for their area, and then having those toolkits go through cycles of adoption, each semester, so that they're getting used, they're getting battle tested, and they're becoming, kind of like all they can be, which is really exciting, because I think it gets to, it sort of takes the idea of MOOCs and then, expands them so that, it's almost like a customizable MOOC for, the community that you're working in. And with that, I think I'm gonna wrap us over to group 1/2, whichever it may be now.
The group formerly known as Group 1. So,
could you update the slide?
Yeah.
We've made edits. So let me introduce you to our persona. She's a court librarian. She has a master's degree. She's a white older female, but new to the job. This persona was picked because those attributes are representative of that profession. So it sort of has broad appeal to that class of user. They have I'm gonna skip down to a problem they're facing and then address the solution, if that's okay. So what are the needs? What is the barrier they're facing? The key barrier is new librarians have a wide variation in a knowledge base. They have knowledge gaps, but also the knowledge gaps vary. One might be missing one thing, another person might be missing another. And yet this is an occupation where you need to get up to speed really quickly, and you need to get up to speed in specialized information, which you might not have before getting the job. So it's this weird problem of you're hired and they know you're not completely prepared to do what they need you to do what the clients, the people who are going to use that library need you to do. And so as they're at the job, they gain the new experience of calibrating to their community and saying, oh, we're facing my library users, they have predictable needs. I need to get up to speed on that. I noticed that they keep needing this thing. I need to learn what that is. And on-the-job training is not going to be happening for that knowledge gap. So let me introduce you to our possible OER solution. It's a learning repository for upskilling that's leveling up that critical area that they were deficient on specific needs of the community. So it could be eviction law, it could be patent law, depends on what that practitioner, that court librarian is noticing. I'm going to need that accessible. I can't just reach for it. I need to know it like that. I'm going to now jump down to bullet 3 here, which is a barrier in acquiring, a previous barrier in acquiring that was it's cost prohibitive. in order to have that professional expertise, even though they're not a lawyer, they're working adjacent to, they're working with the legal community, but they don't have that very nuanced training. How would they acquire it? It would be cost prohibitive. So by virtue of this being OER, that's nullified. Okay.
Awesome.
So we've got this upskilling learning repository for the specialized things that are happening in your community. How do we know that this platform, that this product is doing what it should? We test it by doing internet surveys of the users. Internet surveys could be, I don't know the specifics of how to describe this, but you can use something called skip logics or branch logics. But there are certain survey designs that we would implement, which would give us a sense of whether this product is actually pivotal. Does it actually help those court librarians as much as we want it to, or is it somehow deficient? Is it not worth the time of learning how to use this website? Is it something that they want to save and favorite and share and make it institutional knowledge in their whole city, for example? Well, surveys would give us a sense of that. Success if they're better equipped to help the public, and also that they keep using it, and also maybe that they promote it to others. Is it sustainable and scalable? Yes, if we have knowledge, or excuse me, a domain expert, so a law professor, would have to periodically audit or analyze the information, make sure it's up to date, make sure it is an accurate representation of the problem set and the solution set that these court librarians are facing.
That's awesome.
Amazing. Any other thoughts from group formerly known as One on the persona and solution?
Yeah, we're still number one.
Love it.
I was giving it up too easily. You know, I really enjoyed the breakout session. It was a fantastic discussion. And I don't know when I stepped away whether Jacqueline had an opportunity to briefly explain her experience, but this is all designed around a real life problem that she has faced and that she has noticed that other law librarians have faced when they're trying to understand a new area of law. And I think that the challenge is not limited to law librarians, but really any law adjacent professional or legal support professional. If you're a paralegal, you may have deep paralegaling skills, knowing how to understand in the abstract, but if you get put on an antitrust case, you may be totally lost unless you have access to materials that would enable you to learn the fundamentals of that area of law so that you could better serve whether it's an attorney or the public. So maybe I'd love to hear from Jacqueline any thoughts that she had on this solution and ways maybe we can go forward from here.
I want to thank Daniel and Jameson for letting me talk about a subject so dear to my heart, because I've been very happy as a law librarian, and the profession very much wants to get new blood in the field. But what's happening is that a lot of library schools are being cut back, and the courses in library schools are no longer including a lot of legal bibliography, because how can I say this? Information architecture, a lot of internet businesses are sucking up a lot of the air right now, and also the future of the public court system is being cut back. So anything to lessen the cost of educating people would be wonderful, because what's happening by default right now is a lot of law librarians are being hired who are basically lawyers who can't get jobs as lawyers. So they're being hired as librarians, but it's a different skill set. When I was looking at this and just
Jacqueline?
listening, yes?
Can I modify? I want to introduce a critique and have you shoot it down or endorse it, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay. So, so the value proposition, the thing that we're getting to the users that they're gonna like, we had previously defined it as a reduction in cost. But when you were speaking just now, it made me think one of the critical values, if not maybe the main critical value of this learning repository, is a reduction in time. This expedites the research process. This expedites and standardizes. You will have that knowledge. Here you go. Now you don't have to go through the hard work of having to make a piecemeal skill set. You're not going to have to collect it from different sources because we've aggregated it for you. So to me, if we're aggregating it for you and saying, here's you wanted to brush up on that, here you are. To me, that's not just an issue of cost, but that's an issue of time. Is this different, or where do you think?
Very much so, and a point which we didn't get into discussion, but I think is part of the theme of this open access, which is being supported by New York City, is that if public access libraries, public libraries, were the repositories for this kind of knowledge, these kind of instructional programs, that would be a tremendous example of the value of government and local public funding. Okay, so when you create such an authoritative source of knowledge that could be part, say, of the State University of New York's educational system, the CUNY educational system, you are promoting the value of public resources, of the public. And I think that's a noble goal, and one that should not be neglected. It's not just that we want to help an individual here become more up to speed, but we want to enhance the access to the resources of the community and the efforts of all to improve our lives. And I think that's a wonderful thing to do.
Oh my gosh, Jacqueline.
I can't think of a better way to wrap. That's
right?
perfect.
I know, that was it.
Oh, thank you.
No, thank you all so much to both groups, and even this discussion we had just here was absolutely amazing. I realize we're a bit over time. Hopefully everyone saw that. That was really time well spent, and I know I learned a lot. So I hope you did too. In moving to wrapping up, I think I'll say two things, and then Jameson and Brian, please jump in. So first, thank you so much for attending. It doesn't stop here. These were amazing ideas talking about real problems real people face. This is a starting point. So if you want to follow Legal Hackers on Twitter, join the Legal Hackers New York chapter, wherever you're joining from, or if you already run a chapter, take one of these ideas and build it out. Can you find a library you can engage with? Is there a community activist who you can support and help to make this connection and do a pilot? So I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing, we have many ways to connect and many resources. Jameson and Brian, I'll pass it to you also to take us home here.
Well, this is absolutely fantastic. Thank you all so much for joining from all around the world for this session. I really enjoyed the prototypes. I enjoyed the discussion. There's a lot to take away. I learned a ton, and I can't wait for the next one. Our hope is to take this model and make it available, this workshop model, and make it available for anyone else. Let's see how many ideas we can gather from around the world. But yeah, I put some links to Legal Hackers. I know we have some folks who are involved. If you'd like to get involved, follow Twitter, as Gabby said, go to our website. You can start your own chapter or student group. But I think the most important thing that you could do with respect to OER is talk to your local law professor and encourage them to put their materials online, their courseware, their lesson plans, those sorts of things. By making those available, we can make real strides in promoting access to legal education, to legal information, and access to justice. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and just kind of putting a bow on that as well, because I don't know that I can say anything better than what has already been said. You know, dare to think very big. You know, these problems are ones that seem intractable. But if you look at the encyclopedia industry years ago, that was something that people never thought was going away. And especially something that wouldn't go away if you gave everybody access to edit the encyclopedia in a digital form in a way that was accessible to everybody, in a way that didn't charge money. So some of these ideas might sound crazy, but I think with persistence, with thoughtfulness, and with courage, we can, you know, really make a difference. And so please, please be courageous, be brave, and be thoughtful and creative. And I think that's all I could possibly hope to say.
Hear, hear.
Amazing. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Liam and Open Data Week. And connect by email, Meetup, Twitter. It doesn't stop here. And thank you so much for all of your amazing ideas and time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye,
great day.
everybody.